Good day and great health. My name is Dr. Jericho Sarko of Ohio Specific Chiropractic. I'm a pediatric, family wellness, and upper cervical specific chiropractor. Today on this video, we're going to talk a little bit about immunity. So I posed this kind of short, pithy question. Immunity is immunity, right? And my short, pithy response is not really. You see, it really depends on the type of immunity you are talking about. There are two major ways one can acquire immunity. You can either acquire it through artificial immunity or through natural immunity. Now, the topics of our immune system are very complex, so I'm going to simplify it by just kind of focusing in on just one aspect, and that is the production of antibodies over a period of time. To also help, I kind of gave us a little bit of a visual by drawing these graphs. Now, on our x-axis, this is where we're going to have the representation of time or the lifespan of that individual. On our y-axis, that will represent our antibody titers. Now, what's an antibody titer? Well, an antibody is a protein that is produced by our immune system that is designed to travel throughout the body to look for antigens. Now, what's an antigen? Well, an antigen is a protein that is found on a pathogen that the body has labeled as harmful or detrimental to the functioning of that individual. It's the job then of that antibody to link up with that antigen to start the process of killing, destroying, and removing that pathogen from the body. Now, an antibody titer is a blood test that is going to measure the presence of antibodies found in the blood for that period of time. Let's first now talk about artificial immunity. Now, the main way one acquires artificial immunity is going to be through inoculations or vaccines. Now, all inoculations are going to bypass the majority, if not all, of our normal lines of defense. Some of those normal lines of defense include our skin, our microbiome, our mucous membranes, and our white blood cells. Now, because that inoculation has bypassed our normal lines of defense, it's going to generate a specific immune response in the body. That specific immune response is going to be a humoral immune response. Now, along with generating that specific immune response, we're also going to generate a specific nerve reaction or action as well. Again, because when we talk about the immune system, we ultimately have to talk about the nerve system as well. So as we are generating more of a humoral immune response, we're also going to initiate what's called a sympathetic stress reaction. Now, that sympathetic stress reaction is going to shunt a lot of blood, nutrients, and resources away from our internal organs and then send all that resources to our extremities. The reason for that is that the body thinks there's some type of external threat happening because the inoculation has so quickly bypassed all of our normal lines of defense. Now, the major player in driving the humoral immune response and its production of antibodies is going to be a T helper cell called a T helper 2 cell. Now, a T helper 2 cell, those are traveling the body also, but they are looking for antigens found outside of the cell. If they find antigens floating around outside of the cell, this is called an extracellular infection. These are often seen in what are more commonly known as allergic reactions. So this T helper cell is going to start to find a large dose of antigens floating around in the extracellular fluid, and this is going to initiate an extracellular infection. So the T helper 2 cell is going to start to tell the body that we need to produce antibodies in a specific way to fight off this extracellular infection. Now, the major or the unique way that the T helper 2 cells are going to drive the production of antibodies is that they're going to help produce antibody or tell the body to produce antibodies very, very quickly. So you're going to see that that production of antibodies is going to create a very large spike in the production of those antibodies. One of the downfalls of this, as the body is creating such a quick spike in antibodies, is that it doesn't have the greatest ability to be specific in how it's designing those antibodies against that specific pathogen. At this stage, the body is finding that there's some type of external threat happening, so we need to fight or flight that away from that external threat as best we can. So we're not going to be as specific as possible. We just want to kind of take care of the problem as quickly as we can. As you can see, it's going to create a very large spike in those antibodies, but the downfall is it's not going to be very specific in how those antibodies are designed. Now, another thing that's going to happen with the humoral immune response is that we're going to create a very large spike in antibodies. They're not going to be that specific, and also they're only going to be producing those antibodies for a short duration. It's only going to be an acute reaction to whatever that pathogen is. Now, if you look on our graph here where I have it kind of spiking up and down, those low points are going to be representative of what are called the booster shots as part of the vaccine schedule. So early on they saw that they would perform an inoculation. They would see that yes, they did produce a lot of antibodies, but then they would take another antibody titer test in the future, and they would notice that the antibodies against whatever that pathogen was had diminished very significantly. So they started to add these booster shots into the program to really an attempt to try to keep up the immunity against whatever that pathogen is. But again, no matter if it's the first inoculation, the second, third, or fourth booster shot, you're still going to be generating a humoral immune response. So ultimately, that production of those antibodies will diminish very significantly in a short period of time. Now let's compare that to natural immunity. Now the primary way one acquires natural immunity is going to be through just the normal environmental exposure of that pathogen. What's going to happen is that pathogen is going to travel through the normal lines of defense that we have set up in the body. Again, that pathogen is going to traverse through the skin, the microbiome, the mucous membrane, and come in contact with our white blood cells. Now, even if that pathogen not necessarily breaks through, but travels through all those normal lines of defense, that's when it has the greatest opportunity to the pathogen has the greatest opportunity to enter into the cell. If the pathogen enters into the cell, this is kind of what its ultimate goal is, where it can then start to replicate and reproduce itself. We are now going to start to initiate what's called a cell-mediated response. The big player in that is going to be this T helper 1 cell. Now, the T helper 1 cell is also traveling throughout the body looking for antigens, but it's looking for antigens that have that are going to be found on a cell, not necessarily floating around outside of the cell. They are looking for antigens that are going to be found on a cell. Once this T helper 1 cell finds one of our own cells has these antigen markers on it, it's going to help initiate or help generate the production of antibodies in a unique way. Now, also along with this cell-mediated immune response, we are also going to kick on more of what's called a parasympathetic healing action. What that's going to do is neurologically, our body is going to shunt a lot of its blood, nutrients, and resources not to the extremities, but back into the internal organs to protect them and help them heal as best they can. So as those T helper cells have found those antigens on the cell, this is called an intracellular infection, it's going to help drive the production of antibodies in a specific way. And the way it's going to produce antibodies through a cell-mediated response is that it's also going to tell the body to start producing antibodies, but the thing is, the production of those antibodies isn't going to be as quick as with a humoral immune response. The benefit of that is that the body now has a better ability and opportunity to create antibodies that are going to be specific to that pathogen that the body is trying to rid the body of. So the production of those antibodies is going to ramp up slower compared to a humoral response, but it's going to produce antibodies that are going to be more specific in their design to neutralize that pathogen's effects. Also, another great feature of natural immunity is that not only is the production going to be more, or the production of those antibodies going to be more specific, they're also going to last long term. More often than not, the production of those antibodies can last the lifetime of the individual. Now, besides those major features that we talked about, you will notice that with artificial immunity and the humoral immune response, that it does in fact create a very large spike of antibodies, even more than what it would create in a natural immune or in a cell-mediated response. This is often, sort of touted as one of the selling points of vaccines. They will, kind of show that, see, we've given you this inoculation, we've created more antibodies to whatever the pathogen we are trying to have that effect on, and to give them credit, that's often what will happen. But again, a lot of times we have to take that step back when we talk about our health and look at the whole big picture. Yes, they're going to produce more antibodies, but they're only going to be producing antibodies against that pathogen for a short period of time. Ultimately, that production is going to diminish. What might seem like a downfall of natural immunity is actually to its benefit, is that yes, it's going to produce less antibodies compared to a artificial immunity, but the thing is, if the body is exposed to that pathogen a second, third, fourth time, because it has a low grade but relatively high amount of antibodies already produced, if that pathogen enters the body again, it doesn't have to generate a lot of energy or take away a lot of resources to then just minimally spike up that production of antibodies against that pathogen to really neutralize the effect much more quickly the second, third, and fourth time. Now, this is just a few topics that surround artificial and natural immunity. But if you have any other questions or concerns about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at ohiospecific.com. Thank you very much.